In a story where trust is everything, betrayal cuts the deepest. She believed in love, in loyalty, in a future built side by side. But while she was giving her all, the truth was quietly unfolding behind her back. Lies hidden in plain sight. Secrets waiting for the right moment to destroy everything. And when that moment comes, it doesn't just break her, it awakens her.
Are you ready for tonight?
Because from the ashes of betrayal rises a woman stronger than ever, ready to reclaim her life, her power, and her destiny. This isn't just heartbreak, this is transformation. The lesson? Not everyone deserves your trust, but every betrayal teaches you your true worth. Sometimes, the pain you go through becomes the strength you never knew you had. And walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning of something greater. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to bring you more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
She was declared dead in a Seattle surgical suite at 31 years old. They delivered 2 infants from her body, a boy and a girl. Both of them were breathing, both of them crying, as their mother's monitor flatlined. In the sterile corridor outside, her husband Leo was staring at his phone. He wasn't in prayer. He was on a video call with his mistress, approving a press release about a new clinical trial. 4 days later, that mistress was redecorating the dead woman's home office. 2 weeks later, she was giving an interview from their Lake Washington estate. She posted a photo from the dead woman's private lab with the caption, "Building a Healthier Future." She was certain she had secured the perfect life, but the dead woman was a data ethicist, a genius who accounted for every contingency. In the final encrypted version of their company's source code, she had embedded a protocol within the protocol, a digital failsafe, a final sequence, a ghost in the machine that began with a single line of commented out code, // for mom. If this runs, the data was compromised. And when that code was finally executed, it didn't just obliterate her husband's biotech empire. It unspooled a history of scientific fraud so profound that the mistress, the board members, the investors, and every person who profited realized they were just variables in a dead woman's perfectly coded retribution. This is the story of a mother who built a legacy for her children from beyond the server, and it will rewrite everything you think you know about betrayal, love, and the unbreakable logic of a woman who refused to be erased. We're losing her pulse. Get another line in, now! Dr. Chen's voice was a blade in the controlled chaos of the operating room, sharp, precise, but sweat was beading on his brow. He had managed hundreds of high-risk births in his career. He had never lost a mother, not a single one. And he vowed tonight would not be the first. The monitors screamed a single piercing tone. It was the sound of a system crashing, a sound that would replay in his nightmares for years. The team moved in a frantic dance of blue scrubs, a symphony of gloved hands, and urgent requests. One surgeon fought the hemorrhage, a nurse pushed plasma bags onto the IV stand, another relayed vitals to the anesthesiologist. Ilara Vance lay on the table, 31 years old, 35 weeks pregnant with twins. Strands of dark hair were stuck to her pale skin, and her lips were tinged with blue. Her fingers were wrapped around a small, worn data key on a silver chain, the drive that held the original code for her company's flagship algorithm. 2 new data points, she had once told him with a tired smile, were about to become her life's greatest work. Her eyelids fluttered, her gaze finding Dr. Chen's. She tried to speak, her voice a fragile whisper, almost erased by the wailing alarms. "Tell them," she breathed, "the protocol, it was for them." Then her eyes slid closed. The crash cart rattled into the room. Dr. Chen began compressions, shouting for the paddles, pushing epinephrine into her central line. He fought for 9 minutes that stretched into an agonizing eternity. 9 minutes while his team performed the emergency C-section, delivering 2 babies. Noah was first, then Lily. Both were alive. Both were crying, their first breaths filling the room with a raw, defiant sound. Their mother was not alive. Their mother was not crying. Their mother was gone. Dr. Chen stopped, pulling off his gloves. He looked at the digital clock on the wall. 9:14 p.m. He would never forget that time. "Time of death," he said, his voice catching on the final word, 9:14 p.m. The room went quiet. Not silent. The machine still hummed, the baby still cried, but the tension snapped. It was the heavy stillness that comes when an irreversible truth settles over a room. In the hallway, Leo Vance was leaning against the wall. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't distraught. He was studying a financial chart on his phone, the screen's cool light illuminating his face. He was tracking pre-market stock fluctuations. A nurse appeared, her eyes sad above her surgical mask. She said his name. He didn't look up. She said it again, louder. He held up his index finger, the universal sign for asterisk, just a second asterisk. She said his name a third time. "Mr. Vance, I need you to come with me. Now." He glanced up, his expression a perfect blank. He locked his phone, slid it into his coat pocket, and followed her. He never asked if something was wrong. He didn't hurry. He simply walked. The NICU team had the twins settled in their incubators, 2 tiny transparent boxes, 2 tiny forms wrapped in hospital blankets, Noah and Lily. They were so fragile, so small, but their chests were rising and falling. Survivors, both of them, just like their mother had been. Leo stood before the incubators, his gaze moving between them as if he were reviewing new assets. He turned to the nurse. "What's the long-term prognosis?" he asked. The nurse, shocked by the clinical question, just blinked and said they were stable. "Excellent," he replied. "That's excellent." He didn't ask about Alara, not right away. Not until Dr. Chen guided him into a small consultation room, not until the doctor stood before him and spoke the words. Even then, his reaction was one of pure logistical assessment. He closed his eyes, pinched the bridge of his nose, and let out a long, controlled sigh, like a man processing an unforeseen business complication. "Was it the embolism?" he asked. Dr. Chen confirmed it was. "We did everything we possibly could. The event was sudden and massive. The internal bleeding was beyond our control. I am so very sorry, Leo." He gave a single curt nod. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "But the primary assets are stable," he stated, then quickly corrected himself. "The children, they're stable." "Right," Leo said, exhaling again. "Right, I have to make some calls." He turned and walked back into the hall. He took out his phone. He made one call. It was picked up on the first ring, not the call of a man searching for a contact in a moment of grief, but of someone who had the number ready. "It's over," he said into the phone. "She's gone. Head to the house. I'll disable the guest alarm when I leave." He ended the call and stood for a moment, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital gleaming on the polished floor. The air smelled of antiseptic and filtered air. He put his phone away, straightened his jacket, and walked back toward the NICU. For the first time that night, he composed his face into the perfect mask of a grieving husband. Helen arrived at 11:30 that night. She had taken the last flight from San Francisco, a frantic trip prompted by a text from her daughter hours earlier saying the babies were on their way. Helen had tossed a laptop into her bag and just gone. No checking luggage, no grabbing dinner, no time for anything. Just 2 hours in the air, the drone of the jet engines, and a single hope repeating in her mind. She walked onto the maternity floor expecting to finally hold her grandchildren. She was 65 years old, with sharp, intelligent eyes that had spent 40 years deciphering patterns others couldn't see. She had raised her daughter alone after her husband's death, working as a government cryptographer. She had managed every crisis life had presented. She was ready for this. She was ready to be a grandmother. A hospital chaplain was standing near the nurse's station. Helen stopped. Her gaze moved from the chaplain's kind face to the somber nurse beside him. She knew. Before a single word was uttered, she knew. A codebreaker always knows when a sequence is broken. "No," she whispered. The word was just air. The chaplain came toward her, his voice low, reciting the practiced lines people use to explain the inexplicable collapse of a person's world. Helen didn't hear the sentences. She heard a ringing in her ears, the low hum of the overhead lights, and the faint cry of an infant from a room down the hall. Her grandchild. One of her grandchildren, crying for a mother who would never come. Helen's legs gave out, not into a chair. Right there, in the middle of the hallway, she sank to the sterile floor and covered her face with her hands. And the sound that escaped her was not a word, not a sob, but something far more primal. It was a noise that comes from the very core of a mother's being, where the most unbreakable bonds are encoded. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. A nurse knelt beside her, another offered a glass of water. The chaplain simply stood by, waiting. Leo appeared at the end of the hall. He strode over to Helen, knelt down, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Helen," he said, his voice impossibly smooth. "She fought so hard. The babies are okay. Both of them. She would want us to be strong for them." Helen looked up, her vision swimming with tears and a grief so total it felt like a system failure. She looked at her son-in-law, and somewhere deep in her mind, a lifetime of spotting anomalies, of seeing the flaw in a perfect encryption, took over. A warning flag was raised. She nodded, saying nothing. She let the nurses help her to her feet. She wiped her eyes on the sleeve of her coat. She asked to see the children. The neonatal floor was serene and warm, with the gentle beeping of monitors playing a soft, rhythmic chorus. Vivian stood before Noah's incubator first. The baby was impossibly tiny, 4 pounds, 8 ounces. A delicate trace of blonde hair covered his scalp, and he had Arthur's chin, a miniature, determined line already visible. An orderly with gentle eyes helped Vivian, whose own hands were shaking, to place them inside the esalet's openings. She carefully stroked the back of Sophie's hand with her pinky finger. Sophie's minuscule fingers immediately wrapped around hers. It was a reflex she knew, just a primal instinct, but it felt like a promise. It felt like Lily, reaching across the void through her daughter, saying, "I'm still here, Mom. I'm with you." Vivian stayed for what seemed like an eternity. She drifted between them, Noah and Sophie. She memorized their features, the fragile movement of their chests, the way Noah's mouth made a perfect circle as he slept, the way Sophie would sometimes twitch a smile at some unknowable dream world joke. She remained until the head nurse gently told her that she had to get some rest. She did not rest. She went back to the private birthing suite that overlooked the Boston harbor, sank into a plush armchair, and watched as the city's lights smeared into a watery haze. After some time, she rose to pour herself a cup of tea from the sideboard. She needed to find a password for Lily's music account, something soothing for the babies. She picked up her daughter's tablet from the nightstand. As the screen lit up, so did a security notification. A login to their secure family cloud storage. It was time-stamped from yesterday afternoon during the final, desperate hours of Lily's life. The location pinged from a 5-star resort in the Berkshires. Arthur had been right there, holding Lily's hand. He hadn't left the room. Vivian stood frozen in the silent, luxurious suite, the delicate porcelain teacup slowly cracking in her hand. Hot tea spilled, a shocking warmth against her skin, soaking the cuff of her silk blouse. She barely registered it. In the adjoining room, she could hear Arthur on the phone. His voice wasn't broken with grief. It was crisp, low, and transactional. She heard the words, "finalize the merger," and "seamless transition." Vivian sank onto the damask chaise lounge. She placed the shattered cup on the marble-topped table. She clasped her hands together, squeezing so hard her knuckles turned white. She did not rest at all that night, but she did begin to form a plan. The service was scheduled for Friday. White roses, pure and stark, were arranged in massive displays throughout the gallery of the Museum of Fine Arts. 300 people filled the rows of modern chairs. There was no coffin. Vivian had been adamant. She refused to let 300 associates stare at a box while pretending her daughter was inside, whispering about the terrible tragedy as if it were just another dramatic turn in the market. The gallery smelled of roses and polished stone and the conflicting, expensive colognes of the city's financial elite, all gathered in one sweeping marble hall. Morning light poured through the skylights, throwing sharp, unforgiving lines across the stone floors. The setting was elegant, stunning, and completely indifferent. The light did not care at all that Lily Lexington was gone. Arthur stood at the podium. He was in a bespoke navy suit, not black, no tie. His hair was perfectly coiffed. His eyes were red-rimmed. He spoke without any notes, his voice possessing the smooth, persuasive cadence of an annual shareholder meeting. "Lily was my true north," he began, his voice catching with engineer precision on the word true just for a second, just enough to command their total focus. 300 guests leaned forward. 300 fortunes felt for him. She was the most creative, most generous, most brilliant soul I will ever have the privilege to know, he continued. She invested her whole heart into our life, into our family. She was cultivating our future, our 2 children, and she protected them with every fiber of her being. That was Lily, a master of her craft, a mother, the architect of my entire life. He paused, pressing his lips together in an exquisite show of control. He looked down. When he looked back up, a single perfect tear carved a track down his cheek. "I don't know how to build a life without her," he finished. "But I have to. For Noah, for Sophie, for the beautiful world we were building together." He stepped away from the podium. The crowd began to applaud, a soft, respectful surge of sound. Many of them rose to their feet. A standing ovation for a flawless portrayal of a heartbroken man. Vivian stayed in her chair in the front row. She did not stand. She did not clap. She sat with her back ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on a sculpture far on the other side of the room. She was thinking about the cloud storage login, about the man who was conducting business while his wife was dying. Owen sat next to her, Lily's older brother, 38, with the sharp, methodical calm of a man who had spent a decade as a federal prosecutor. He had said almost nothing since flying in from D.C. He simply sat there, his gaze locked on Arthur, the muscles in his jaw as tight as a steel cable. "This is a quarterly earnings report," Vivian murmured, her voice so low that only Owen could hear it. "He's pitching his next venture. Your sister called me 2 weeks ago, frantic," Owen replied in a hushed tone. "She said Arthur was leveraging their entire estate on a series of trades that felt ethically bankrupt." She hung up before she could say more. Owen fell silent, but on his knee, his large, capable hands slowly tightened into fists. Near the back of the gallery, a woman surveyed the room with the cool appraisal of a senior partner, Genevieve Croft, a senior analyst at Arthur's hedge fund. She wore a tailored crimson dress that was both subtle and fiercely expensive. Her lipstick was a deep, defiant red, not a somber, tasteful nude, but a bold, boardroom shade, the kind of color that stakes a claim, the kind of color that says, "I am here and I am taking over." She was in the second to last row. She did not shed a tear. She watched Arthur's speech with an unreadable expression. Was it sympathy, or was it a performance review? The look of a partner managing a critical acquisition. After the service, the attendees were ushered to a reception at a sleek restaurant in the Seaport District. No somber buffets here, only waiters moving with trays of champagne and bites of lobster rolls. Vivian stood beside a towering floral arrangement, accepting empty condolences, air kisses, and the same tired cliches. "She's in a better place now. The babies have a guardian angel. You have to be strong for them. Time heals all wounds." Time doesn't heal, Vivian thought. It just hollows you out, leaving more room for the pain. Sarah, Lily's best friend from culinary school, found her near the Raw Bar. 36, with a wild mane of auburn hair and eyes swollen from 4 days of non-stop weeping. "Viv," Sarah said, grabbing Vivian's arm, "I need to tell you something. I spoke to Lily about a month ago. She said something strange. She said if anything ever happened to her, I had to check her very first recipe journal. She said, the secret ingredient is in the sourdough starter. She made me say it back to her. She was completely serious. Vivian just looked at Sarah. The muted roar of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the hum of financial chatter, it all faded into a dull background noise. The journal, Vivian repeated. Sarah nodded. The sourdough starter. She meant it. Vivian absorbed the information. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't let her face show a single thing. She just nodded, squeezed Sarah's arm, and whispered, "Thank you." She had learned one thing in her 63 years on this earth. When you discover you are playing a game of high-stakes poker, you do not, under any circumstances, show your opponent your hand. And she could feel his eyes on her. Arthur's mother, Catherine Lexington, was across the room, 68, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair and her trademark string of pearls. She had not offered a single word of condolence to Vivian since she had arrived at the hospital. Not one. She had not even inquired about the twins. She stood with her circle of old money matriarchs watching Vivian like a chess master analyzing a threat, her eyes glittering with cold, strategic intent. 3 days after the service, Vivian began a logbook. Arthur was never there for the 2 a.m. feedings, not a single time. The new night nurse handled everything. The nurse, a young woman named Maria, was 27. A quick online search showed she worked for a highly exclusive childcare service, a service that the Lexington Family Foundation was a primary investor in. Arthur had hired her less than 48 hours after Lily had passed. He had not consulted Vivian. He had not asked anyone. In that same period, Arthur had a team come to their home to dismantle Lily's personal office. He had already had her prestigious restaurant's reservations system shut down and her long-standing contracts with local farms canceled. Liam had a team come to their Manhattan penthouse and crate up Clara's entire art collection, every Renaissance sketch, every modern sculpture, every curated volume, without asking Evelyn, without consulting his late wife's brother, without leaving a single piece of beauty for his own children. Evelyn watched, her face a mask of quiet grief. She noted it all on a small, encrypted device her daughter had insisted she carry. Movers' names, dates, crate inventory numbers. On the third day, after the last crate was sealed, she saw the notification on the kitchen's smart home hub. She was monitoring the feed from the nursery, where Noah and Olivia slept in their glowing smart bassinets. It was an email preview left on the screen with breathtaking carelessness. Confirmation, your Little Beginnings registry with Serafina Russo. The project coordinator was listed as Liam Thorne. Evelyn's breath hitched. A freezing dread washed over her as she heard Liam's voice from his office down the hall, smooth and confident on a call. "It's almost done, Sarah. The collection is being moved to storage. The contracts for the Apex are signed. Our new start is just days away." Evelyn stood motionless, her heart a painful, heavy stone in her chest. The next morning, a new event appeared on the family's shared digital calendar. It wasn't tucked between other meetings. It was alone, bold, and final. Final design approval, the Apex, Residence 75A. Scheduled for the following Wednesday. She read the words 4 times. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, skipping the cream and sugar she usually took. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and gazed out at the sprawling New York City lights. The appointment was not hidden. That was the detail that turned her sorrow into something colder, harder. They hadn't even bothered with discretion. It was a spectacular display of arrogance, a belief that the bereaved grandmother was too old, too broken, too consumed by sadness to notice their plotting. They had made a profound miscalculation. Evelyn carried her coffee into Clara's private gallery. Liam hadn't dared change this room yet. She sat on the velvet settee, which faced a wall of her daughter's recent acquisitions. She saw the evidence of a life cut brutally short. Research notes for an essay on Florentine masters scribbled on a notepad, a half-finished glass of sparkling water, a silk scarf left on the arm of the settee, and the faint, lingering scent of Clara's white tea and fig perfume. She saw the sonogram images of Noah and Olivia propped on a small easel. Her daughter was just here in this very space, vibrant and brilliant, examining the brushstrokes of a new painting, humming an aria, resting a hand on her stomach, feeling the movements of the two souls she was bringing into the world. Evelyn gripped the arm of the settee, her knuckles white. She would not cry. Rage was a far more useful tool. Rage was a map. It had a destination. Grief was just an ocean trying to pull you down. She sat in that gallery for what felt like an eternity. When she finally rose, her coffee was cold. She poured it into a potted orchid. She returned to the main living area. She gave the au pair a warm, believable smile. She placed a gentle kiss on the foreheads of her sleeping grandchildren. She complimented Liam on the gourmet meal he'd had delivered but claimed to have cooked. That night, after the penthouse fell silent and Liam was on another late-night business call, Evelyn went back to the gallery. She walked toward the climate-controlled display walls. Hanging above Clara's desk was her most precious piece, a small, original preparatory sketch by Leonardo da Vinci. She looked at it for a long time. Then she reached out and pressed a specific spot on the gilded frame, a tiny floral detail Clara had once shown her. Nothing happened. Then she tapped it lightly 3 times, a simple rhythm from a lullaby she used to sing to Clara. A section of the millwork beside the desk emitted a soft click and slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a sleek black thumb drive, so like her daughter. Modern, protected, and concealed by a work of ancient genius. Evelyn's hand was unsteady as she picked up the small drive, her heart pounding. She would not use it here, not in this house, a fortress of Liam's technology where every keystroke could be monitored. She put the drive in her pocket. She slid the secret panel shut. It closed without a sound. She turned off the gallery lights. She would uncover its secrets somewhere else, somewhere private, somewhere secure, somewhere Liam Thorne would never imagine. The next day, Evelyn drove to a private co-working space she rented under her maiden name. In a small soundproof office, she took out a brand new laptop she had purchased with cash. She plugged in the drive. It was encrypted, but a single text file on the drive was titled Password. It contained one word, Evelyn, her daughter's final act of trust. The drive unlocked, revealing perfectly organized folders. One was labeled, For You, Mom. She clicked it. A video file opened. Clara was on the screen looking exhausted but determined. Mom, she said, her voice clear and steady. If you are watching this, my worst fears were realized. Do not let him raise my children. The drive has everything. Evelyn watched the video of her daughter 3 times before she could breathe again. She opened another file, a document named My Statement. Clara's voice narrated in her mind, not as a nervous mother-to-be, but as the sharp, methodical curator she was. The document started directly. Mother, I know the story Liam will tell. He has been laying the groundwork for months, that I was an anxious, hormonal, pregnant woman. I was not paranoid. I discovered his shadow accounts. He has been with her for years, the entire time we were going through fertility hell. The whole time I prayed for these babies, he was funding another life with her. Evelyn's hands shook as she scrolled through the pages. I found a recurring wire transfer from his venture capital fund, a massive payment to Serafina Events for a lifestyle project. The client name was redacted, but the budget was obscene. He was building their future home with our money. I confronted him. He denied it all. He said she was a corporate event planner, that I was being irrational, that my mommy brain was inventing conspiracies. He told me I should increase my therapy sessions, that my stress was hurting the babies. The document was over 20 pages long, outlining how Clara had gathered more proof. Digital receipts for a private suite at a boutique hotel in Soho, reservation confirmations for romantic dinners at restaurants he claimed to be visiting for work, a diamond bracelet, not hers, found in his travel bag. She explained how she had hired a private investigator funded by her own premarital trust. The investigator confirmed everything. The woman was Serafina Russo, 43 years old, an elite event planner. They had been together for 6 years, but the section of the statement that made Evelyn's heart stop was near the end. I am writing this because Liam has been meeting with his wealth manager 3 times last month. He asked about the clauses in our prenup. He asked about the legal transfer of my company's shares upon the death of a spouse. He asked if there were legal precedents for contesting a will in cases of debilitating postpartum depression. And last week, he asked our doctor if women carrying twins were more susceptible to cardiac events during delivery. He said it so calmly, like he was asking about market fluctuations. Evelyn pushed back from the desk, the cold air of the office biting at her skin as she stared at the screen. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. She forced herself to read on. I have already acted. Our family lawyer helped me restructure my will and trust last month. If anything happens to me, my entire personal fortune is yours, and all my shares go into a new protected trust for the children. Liam is completely written out. I know this sounds harsh, but a man who calculates the financial benefit of his pregnant wife's death does not deserve her wealth. He does not deserve her children, and he will not be the guardian of her legacy. The statement ended, I truly hope you never have to read this. I hope my fears are all wrong. I hope I come home from the hospital with 2 healthy, noisy babies, and we can delete all of this and laugh about how crazy I was. But if I don't, if the worst has happened, you now have what you need. Fight for them, Mom, the way you always fought for me. You are the strongest woman I know. You are the only one I can trust with their lives. I love you. Now go be their grandmother. Your Clara. Evelyn meticulously saved the file and ejected the drive. She pressed her hands to her face, the silence of the small office deafening. The distant city traffic was the only sound in the world. Grief was a weakness she could no longer afford. Eleanor had moved past the raw agony into a state of cold, crystalline fury. She stared at the research tablet's illuminated screen, at the encrypted files, the financial charts, the fragmented voice memos. Her daughter, Claire, had been a titan in the biotech world for a decade before she met Julian. She knew how to build a company as precisely as she sequenced a genome. She knew how to map a discovery. She understood that in the world of venture capital and intellectual property, hard data was the only truth that mattered. The contents of the tablet were a labyrinth of scientific genius. The evidence was hidden inside folders named with project codes and gene sequences. A file labeled with a protein string held the offshore accounts. Another with a cell division study held private messages, and one titled Phase 3 Trials held legal drafts. Even while pregnant with twins and being subtly undermined by her husband, Claire had been exact, analytical. She had been documenting the blueprint of his betrayal. Eleanor started the engine. She drove through the fog-draped streets to David Chen's townhouse in San Francisco's Pacific Heights. It was nearly 11 at night. She hadn't bothered to call. She parked, walked up his stone steps, and pressed the buzzer, clutching the tablet that held the final, damning research of her only child. David, a man in his late 40s with the focused eyes of an IP lawyer, opened the door. He had been Claire's staunchest ally, her legal counsel since she'd patented her first algorithm out of grad school, the lawyer who helped her incorporate GeneSys just before it became a billion-dollar company. He saw Eleanor's expression, his gaze dropping to the tablet she was holding, and his face became a mask of stone. He ushered her into his home office without a single word. They sat at the minimalist steel desk in his study until the sky began to lighten. David used a decryption key Claire had given him years ago. He navigated the complex file structure and examined the Shell Corporation's funding rounds, the message logs, the photos of Julian with his company's brand strategist, Simone. One voice memo in particular made David remove his glasses and pinch the bridge of his nose. It was Julian speaking to Simone, recorded by Claire on her phone one evening. Once the babies arrive and she's on maternity leave, we're golden. She'll be so distracted and sleep-deprived, she'll approve the new Series B funding without reading the fine print on the board seat assignments. She trusts me completely." David powered down the tablet. "He was planning a corporate coup the entire time," he said, his voice a low vibration of disbelief and rage. "Before she even gave birth, he was plotting to dilute her shares and seize control of the board." Eleanor simply nodded. She had felt a surge of unease when she saw that woman at the memorial speaking with investors as if she were the host. "What's our first step?" she asked. David looked at Eleanor, his own grief for his friend and client a palpable force in the room. A woman whose brilliance he had championed since she was a student was gone. "We follow her data to the letter," he said. "We go to war." 2 weeks after the funeral, Julian told Eleanor it was time for her to go. He did it over artisanal coffee from a local roaster Claire had loved. Eleanor recalled how Claire's face would light up talking about the tasting notes. Now, Julian was using her favorite ceramic mug like it was nothing, a vessel empty of memory, empty of her. "Eleanor," he started, his tone soft and condescending, the practiced cadence of a venture capitalist used to getting his way. "I think it's time you headed home. Leo and Maya need a stable, optimized routine, and your presence is becoming, let's say, a variable we need to control." Eleanor set her mug down and met his gaze. "A variable?" she echoed. "Their sleep cycles are being disrupted. The nanny mentioned you're interfering with their feeding schedule. I'm simply prioritizing their developmental needs." "Their needs are best met by their grandmother," Eleanor replied, her voice cooling to a sub-zero calm. Julian's smile tightened, a barely perceptible flicker in his jaw. "I appreciate your help," he said, "but this is my house now. They are my children. I have to build a new system that works for us." Eleanor took a deliberate sip of her coffee and gave him a placid smile. "Of course," she said. "You're absolutely correct. I'll start packing." Every word was a tactical concession. She was creating a smokescreen, buying David time to prepare the emergency petitions for the court. Time to be analytical. Claire's final, fragmented notes were a lesson in strategy. Never show your hand, gather all the data, build your model, then you render them obsolete. She was gone by 3 that afternoon, settled into a suite in a residential hotel just a few blocks from the house. Close enough to be a lingering threat, yet distant enough to give Julian the illusion that he had won. Within a week, Simone had taken over the home office, the very room where Claire had mapped the genetic sequences that made Julian's venture fund a Silicon Valley legend, the same space where she had backed up her data and outlined the strategy that would become his downfall. Simone remade the minimalist Pacific Heights home. Loud, garish paintings replaced the framed patents and scientific awards Claire had hung. A tacky motivational poster about disrupting the future now hung where Claire's whiteboard of complex equations once stood. She informed the concierge she was supporting Julian through an unimaginable loss. She told the other mothers at the playground she was a dear friend from the company, helping with the newborns. To anyone who would listen, she lamented that the poor twins needed a consistent female role model. She conveniently failed to mention she had been their father's mistress for the last 2 years. The takeover was swift, efficient, and complete. Within 3 weeks of Claire's death, Simone had rewritten the nanny's contract, replaced the ergonomic furniture Claire had chosen, and systematically erased every trace of Claire's quiet brilliance from the home. One night, Mark, Claire's brother, called Eleanor, his voice thick with outrage. "Eleanor, you won't believe this. Go to Simone's LinkedIn page. Look at her latest post." Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the browser. She found the profile immediately. Of course, Simone lived for public validation. The post was a professionally shot photo of Simone in Claire's lab, posed in front of the custom-built gene sequencer Claire had designed. Eleanor's throat tightened. She recognized it instantly. She had been there with Claire, 7 months pregnant, in order to reduce her stress, as she supervised the final calibration. "Our generation's telescope," Claire had whispered, her hand resting on the machine's cool metal casing, "so we can read the stories inside of us." And now Simone was standing beside it, perfectly lit for a headshot with a caption that read, "Humbled to be carrying on a visionary's legacy and building a new future. #Women in Tech." Eleanor ended the call. She sat on the generic hotel armchair, her hands clenched in her lap. She inhaled and exhaled, slowly, like someone bracing for impact. The next morning, her lawyer David called with news that was infinitely worse. He had looked into the company's key person insurance. Julian had already filed the claim. $10 million, David said. The policy was quintupled 3 months ago, up from $2 million. A heavy silence hung on the line. The amendment required Claire's biometric thumbprint authorization on her company tablet. I had a forensic security expert analyze the logs. The authorization wasn't time-stamped from her known devices. It was authenticated from a terminal with an IP address that traces back to Julian's office. "A forgery," Eleanor whispered. Her daughter's entire professional legacy had been commodified, reduced to a stolen thumbprint on a policy that would finance Julian's new life with the woman desecrating her memory online. "There is more," David said, his tone grim. "I've been following the money trail from Claire's notes. Julian set up a shell LLC about 2 years ago. He diverted over $3 million from GeneSys's research and development grants into it. He did it by padding invoices from lab equipment suppliers." "What did he use that money for?" she asked, a cold sickness spreading through her. "He bought a majority stake in a rival biotech firm, and he purchased a penthouse condominium in the Millennium Tower. The title is in Simone's name." Eleanor said nothing. He was also paying Simone a monthly retainer of $20,000, which he classified as strategic consulting fees. And Eleanor, David paused. Claire's inheritance from her father, the $500,000 she used as the initial seed money for the company, Julian transferred it to his personal venture fund 8 months ago. The transaction was labeled loan repayment, but there was never any loan. Eleanor looked up. She saw her own reflection in the darkened hotel window. A 65-year-old woman, her hair almost entirely white now, with lines around her eyes that were no longer from smiling but were etched there by grief. She looked exhausted. She was exhausted. But exhausted was not the same as broken. "File it all," she commanded, her voice becoming as sharp and precise as a scalpel. "Every injunction, every restraining order, whatever probate court filings we need. I want emergency guardianship of my grandchildren, and I want Julian Mercer's assets frozen before he can steal another dollar of my daughter's work." For the twins' 2-month wellness check, Eleanor got there first. She had made the appointment herself with Dr. Evans's office, citing her status as the secondary medical guardian listed on all of Claire's intake forms. She had both infants, Leo and Maya, sleeping in the smart bassinet stroller Claire had spent a month researching. The original gift card from her lab was still tucked in the side pocket. She was giving her name to the receptionist when the clinic's glass door slid open. Simone swept in, a ludicrously expensive diaper bag slung over her arm, her makeup flawless, her smile radiating confident charm. She walked directly to the reception desk. "I'm here on behalf of the Matheson infants," she stated, her voice clear and firm in the hushed minimalist clinic. "I am their designated healthcare proxy." A few of the mothers scrolling on their phones glanced up. The receptionist looked from Diana to the younger woman, Isabel, a line of confusion creasing her brow. Diana didn't need to raise her voice. She simply leaned over the high-tech double bassinet, unclipped the smart restraint on little Leo, and lifted him into her arms. He molded against her shoulder, a familiar, warm weight. "My daughter's directives are quite clear," Diana said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "These are my grandchildren. I am listed on every medical and legal document as their primary guardian in case of emergency. This woman is a colleague of their father's. She has no authority here." Isabel's professionally curated smile flickered for a millisecond. "Arthur asked me to be here," she countered. "He wanted me to handle this." "Arthur isn't here," Diana replied coolly. "I am." Turning her back on Isabel, she carried Leo toward the examination rooms. The pediatric nurse, understanding immediately, guided the bassinet with Maya inside, following Diana's lead. Isabel was left standing alone by the entrance, clutching a designer baby tech bag that was suddenly useless. After their appointment, Diana took a cab to the riverfront. She found a quiet bench along the Charles River Esplanade with a view of the Cambridge skyline that Chloe had always adored. She sat, wrapping her wool coat tighter against the sharp wind sweeping across the water. Chloe Ann Matheson, beloved daughter, innovative designer, true partner. Diana did not weep. She watched the slate-gray water lap against the embankment, steeling herself for what was to come. Tulips. Chloe had loved the sea of tulips in the public garden every spring. Diana flicked a dry leaf from her wool slacks. She imagined her thumb tracing the letters that would soon be carved into polished granite. Beloved wife, devoted daughter, visionary designer. 4 words, all true, but they omitted the most important one, archivist. That's what her daughter had been forced to become. An archivist who had built an unbreachable collection of evidence using nested encryption, Go servers, and meticulously annotated code repositories. An archivist who had to conduct her research in secret because the man she was married to had gaslighted her into believing her sharp instincts were just symptoms of tech industry burnout. Diana sat there until the city lights began to shimmer on the river's surface. She stood, her body stiff from the cold, and placed a hand on the cold metal of the bench. "I found the drive, Chloe," she whispered into the wind. "I have the master key. I will not let him write your story." She began the long walk back toward the city. The evening haze was starting to blur the tops of the skyscrapers, painting the sky in the exact shades of slate and lavender Chloe had chosen for the twins' nursery. A calm, hopeful sky for the 2 babies she had so desperately wanted to bring home to it. Diana started the car and returned to her hotel overlooking the harbor. She had a cup of tea she didn't touch delivered to her room. After staring into the cup, she confirmed via a secure message with her lawyer David that he would file the petition for emergency guardianship at precisely 9 in the morning. Then, sinking onto the stiff hotel bed, she opened her laptop. Inside a triple encrypted container file, she logged the date and time. She documented the patronizing, dismissive tone of the email from Arthur's attorney. She saved high-resolution captures of every one of Isabel's cloying social media posts, broadcast from inside Chloe's own house. She cataloged every condescending text message from Arthur. She compiled a list of every designer, programmer, and colleague who could verify her account of the events. She saved the container, locked the laptop, and placed it on the bedside table next to a small silver locket, a digital war chest, and an analog key. One built by a daughter, the other now wielded by her mother, both created to protect 2 small sleeping children. Arthur's lawyer was Rex Vance, a name known for scorched earth tactics in Silicon Valley lawsuits and NDAs that could silence armies. Vance filed an emergency motion to prevent Diana from coming near the Beacon Hill townhome, arguing she was technologically illiterate and increasingly paranoid. The motion claimed her grief was causing her to misinterpret standard business practices and that she was violating a father's sacred right to grieve with his children. The entire filing was engineered to brand Diana as unstable and obsolete. Attached was a sworn declaration from Arthur Matheson Sr., a man who moved through boardrooms in bespoke suits and could gut a company with a single phone call. He alleged Diana had always resented Arthur's success and was creating a chaotic environment for the infants and the entire family. David reviewed the files from his office overlooking Post Office Square, his expression unreadable on the video call. He scrolled through the motion once, then a second time, before taking a long drink of water. "They're isolating you," he said, his voice flat. It's a classic strategy. Frame the grandmother as out of touch, control the narrative, poison the well. By the time you walk into that courtroom, the judge already thinks you're a relic. So what's our counter? Diana asked. We file our own motion for grandparental rights, citing Massachusetts law. But the real attack is this. I'm filing to have the court appoint a guardian ad litem for Leo and Maya. That's an impartial, court-appointed attorney who has only one mission, to represent the best interests of the children. Not me, not Arthur, just the twins, David clarified. What are our grounds to ask for that? Our grounds are that Arthur Matheson moved his head of product development, a single woman with whom he shares a complex personal and professional history, into the marital home less than a month after his wife's death, that he then hired that woman's former mentee to act as the children's full-time nanny, that a preliminary forensic audit shows a pattern of alarming fund transfers to unaudited Cayman Island entities, and that the children's mother created a secure digital archive of communications indicating she feared for their future welfare. Diana was quiet for a moment. The distant horn of a ferry in the harbor sounded through her window, the murmur of the city, the ordinary sounds of a world that refused to stop just because hers had. File it, she said. David also submitted a motion to compel genetic verification for both children. He told Diana it was standard procedure, but she heard something else in his tone, a strategic precision that went far beyond routine. Why are we pushing for the complete forensic audit? She asked. Because the digital money trail from their joint venture fund to his new charitable foundation, David Chen explained slowly, was initiated the very same week Chloe began her IVF treatments. And in my experience, tech founders who build fortunes on borrowed ideas are never just dishonest about one single thing. The preliminary hearing was a month out, just 1 month, 28 days to prepare, to strategize, to live in a sterile suite at a Back Bay hotel while Arthur posted tastefully melancholy pictures of himself breaking ground on the Chloe Matheson Innovation Hub at his alma mater. Diana used every single second. She consulted with David's digital forensics expert, a man named Kenji whose sharp suits were as precise as his code, who spoke about blockchain ledgers the way an art historian talks about Renaissance paintings. Kenji mapped out the digital labyrinth like a conspiracy board. The Shell Corporation registered in Nevis, the crypto transfers disguised as server maintenance fees, the luxury condo in the seaport owned by an anonymous LLC, the monthly payments routed through a third-party payroll service, the AI-generated voice authorization used to liquidate a stock portfolio, the inheritance that had vanished into thin air. He engineered a fortress of digital deception, Kenji concluded, his voice a mix of clinical admiration and profound contempt. From the outside, it appears seamless, but its entire foundation is built on a fundamental fraud. Sarah, Chloe's closest friend from design school, submitted her own sworn affidavit. Julia remembered the phone call from Clara, asking for help turning her beloved music studio into a nursery. She recalled Clara's strange obsession with installing signal-blocking acoustic panels, which seemed like overkill at the time. She described a vibrant, passionate cellist who, over the course of her marriage, had been systematically manipulated from a musical prodigy into a bundle of anxieties. She just started to fade, Julia told Marcus, her voice heavy with guilt. Especially this past year. She pulled out of the spring quartet series. She canceled her solo recital. There was always some new excuse, a sudden bout of fatigue, or a crisis at Damien's company, always a quick defense of him. I should have pushed harder. I should have seen what he was doing to her soul. I didn't, and now I have to live with that. Sarah, Clara's sister, flew in from Denver and took the hotel room next to her mother's. She arrived with just a briefcase and a controlled fire in her eyes that was both reassuring and terrifying. I'm not here to make a scene, she promised Eleanor, but I'm not leaving, not until he answers for what he did. The days before the initial hearing were filled with a crushing silence that settled in Eleanor's chest, making her own heartbeat feel deafening. She spent her mornings on the hotel treadmill, walking at a brutal, relentless pace, just putting one foot in front of the other, the only thing that felt like progress. In the afternoons, she sifted through the contents of Clara's encrypted tablet. Marcus had a cryptographer break the encryption. It wasn't a diary, it was an indictment, a perfectly organized archive of audio snippets, calendar logs, and encrypted emails that documented a secret and heartbreaking investigation. The first few entries were filled with hope. Week 10. We saw the flutter on the ultrasound. A tiny, perfect butterfly. I had to just sit in the car for a few minutes before I could drive. I was so overcome with joy. Damien just squeezed my hand. I don't think it feels real for them until the baby is actually here. Week 13. The nausea is relentless, but I don't even care. One perfect heartbeat. I would be sick for 9 whole months if it meant he was safe. Week 17. We started talking names. Damien wanted something traditional. I wanted something musical. We compromised on Leo after my grandfather because Clara thought it sounded both strong and lyrical. Then the tone of the evidence began to change, a gradual slide from suspicion into chilling certainty. Week 21. Damien felt him kick. He actually got emotional. For a second, I let myself think I'd imagined everything. Week 23. He canceled on our birthing class, said there was a major server meltdown at Nexus, and it was an all-hands-on-deck emergency. An alert for a shared cloud drive update appeared on my phone later that evening. Project Nightingale, Audio Archive, SR Review. Our anniversary is in June. My name is Clara, not SR. Week 25. I found a receipt in his travel documents. A private jet charter to Monaco for a weekend. He was supposedly at a tech conference in Napa. I found the passenger manifest online. Week 29. I researched the other passenger. Sophia Rossi, the venture capitalist who led his Series B funding round, the woman he brought to the museum gala last year. Just a key investor, he told me. Week 31. I accessed the data archives from our home's Nexus smart system. He was beta testing it. He had searched shielding assets in high net worth divorce and international custody laws unmarried fathers. He was doing this before we even picked out a crib. He was building his escape route while we were building our family. Eleanor closed the tablet. She placed her hand on its smooth glass screen as if she could feel the ghost of her daughter's touch as she had saved each piece of evidence, cataloging every lie, all alone, while she was carrying a child and her husband was constructing another life entirely. She scrolled to the final file. Week 33. The last entry, saved 4 days before she went into premature labor. I'm not staying because I'm weak. I'm staying because I am carrying our son and I have no safe place his money and his lawyers couldn't touch. But I'm preparing. Every single day, I am preparing. My mother has no idea. No one does. But they will. When the time is right, they will. She had been composing a new life with one hand and scoring the destruction of her old one with the other, choosing lullabies for her son and archiving audio files of his father's secret calls during the same sleepless nights. A woman fighting a war on 2 fronts, shrouded in silence because her husband had masterfully convinced her that her own sharp mind was just a symptom of hormonal imbalance. Eleanor powered off the tablet. The small device sat on the desk, its screen dark. 2 parts of a single life, a mother's fierce love and a wife's cold fury, stored on a single piece of technology in a quiet San Francisco apartment. She switched off the lamp and sat in the growing darkness, listening to the city sounds below. She thought about her Clara, the brilliant, fiery cellist she was before she met Damien. The kind of woman who could make an entire concert hall hold its breath, who filled notebooks with musical notations, who sang off-key but with tremendous joy in the car. The person she used to be was gone, meticulously dismantled and swapped out for a version that was more suspicious, more vigilant. a woman who documented her own life like an auditor examining a hostile company because she understood, with chilling certainty, that her testimony alone would never outweigh his power. Sophia Rossi drew a heavy wool blanket around herself, gazing out at the glittering expanse of the New York City skyline. "You knew, didn't you, my brilliant girl?" she murmured to the empty penthouse. "You knew everything, and I am so deeply sorry I couldn't decipher what you were trying to tell me." The floor-to-ceiling window cast back only her own ghostly reflection. The building's ventilation system hummed a low, constant note. The silence was absolute. From a distant street below, the faint wail of a siren briefly pierced the quiet. Sophia had no intention of sleeping. She was conserving her energy. She would need every ounce of it for the battle ahead. The conference room on the 57th floor felt airless. Sterling and Cromwell, LLP, estate and trust litigation. The air smelled of expensive leather and corporate anxiety. The recessed lighting overhead cast sharp, unforgiving shadows on the polished mahogany table. Sophia wore a charcoal gray suit that Isabella had insisted on buying for her 3 years ago. Tucked inside her briefcase was a micro SD card, a tiny piece of plastic holding the power of a controlled demolition. Marcus Thorne arrived with his legal counsel, both exuding the effortless confidence of men who never lost. Marcus carried an air of serene composure, the very picture of a man with a clear conscience and a steady heart. From his seat at the head of the table, he offered Sophia a brief, dismissive nod. With the somber theatricality of someone playing the part of the bereaved husband, Marcus sat next to Kendra Vance, the rising star architect at his firm. Sophia made a conscious effort not to look at her. Her focus remained on the arbitrator, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Marcus's lawyer, a polished man named Davies, began his opening statement. He wove a narrative of a real estate titan, a devoted partner shattered by the sudden tragic accident that took his pregnant wife, now bravely facing the future and the legacy they had built together. He painted Sophia as a loving but ultimately intrusive sister, unable to accept her own sister's choices and independence. He used the word overbearing 3 separate times. He deployed the phrase clouded by grief twice. He suggested that Sophia's sorrow had manufactured a conspiracy where none existed, casting herself as a rescuer rather than a complication. The man was slick. Sophia had to admit it. He possessed the kind of deep, resonant voice that suggested old money and an unshakable place in the world. Then, Kendra was invited to speak. She depicted Sophia as a woman who had never approved of Marcus, someone who constantly planted seeds of doubt in Isabella's mind. She testified that Sophia's frequent calls after the pregnancy was announced created a stressful environment, forcing Marcus to gently ask for space on Isabella's behalf. She stated that Sophia's questions about the prenuptial agreement were relentless and inappropriate. Each claim was a kernel of truth, encased in a thick shell of misdirection. That was the genius of their strategy. They weren't fabricating events from scratch. They were experts in the art of reframing, bending the shape of reality to serve their own story. Sophia's lawyer remained silent. He let them construct their narrative. He allowed their carefully crafted fiction to settle in the quiet, pressurized room. Only then did he get to his feet. "Mr. Arbitrator," he said, his voice calm, "we will show that Mr. Thorne's account is not merely a different interpretation of events, but a calculated and deliberate fabrication." He detailed the existence of coded financial ledgers embedded within Isabella's final architectural blueprints, accessed using a sequence hidden in her personal design journal. He then presented the wire transfers from an offshore shell company showing 6-figure monthly payments to Kendra Vance. He laid out the purchase agreement for a waterfront estate in the Hamptons, funded entirely by that company, along with digital invoices for sports cars, couture, and private jet charters. Davies then produced translated passages from Isabella's journals where she detailed Marcus's campaign of psychological erosion and intellectual theft. Finally, he played a short audio file from the micro SD card. It was a recording Isabella had made, her voice strained and weary. Marcus's voice, smooth and cold, could be heard in the background. After all I've given you, a little gratitude wouldn't be out of place. Go ahead, call your sister. Who do you think she's going to believe? A number-crunching accountant or me? A quiet shock rippled through the room. The air grew thick, charged with the sudden, brutal exposure of a private betrayal. The arbitrator then allowed Sophia to speak to Marcus's claims. Sophia stood. She looked at the arbitrator, then locked her gaze on Marcus and finally on Kendra. When she began, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the conference room. Mr. Arbitrator, my sister is gone. She paused, letting the weight of the words fill the space. She left behind a child who will now never be born, a child who will never see the beautiful buildings their mother designed. They will never hear her laugh. The room was perfectly still. Nobody moved. The man who promised to cherish her was designing a new life with his mistress, while my sister was carrying their child. He used her own inheritance to buy their future home. He methodically isolated her from her family. And now he has the nerve to sit in this room and portray my love for my sister as some kind of emotional imbalance. Her voice dropped, taking on a sharp, metallic quality, the sound of a woman who had processed her grief into pure, focused resolve. I am not here today because I am imbalanced. I am not here because I am broken by grief. I am here because my sister knew this day would come. She left me a blueprint. She left me a record of truths she was too afraid to say out loud. She gave me a sacred duty, and I will see it through. The arbitrator studied Sophia for a long, silent beat. His eyes moved to Marcus. He glanced at the thick binder of evidence Sophia's lawyer had provided. He issued an immediate injunction, freezing Marcus's control of Isabella's professional assets and intellectual property. He appointed Sophia as the temporary administrator of the estate. He denied the motion to dismiss Sophia's claims. A single throbbing vein appeared on Marcus's temple, a tiny, furious drumbeat. Sophia saw it. She held his burning glare and did not look away. In the marble lobby, Jean was pacing. As a character witness, he hadn't been allowed in the room during the testimony. He was humming with a kind of restless, creative energy that seemed capable of either designing a cathedral or burning one down. Marcus burst through the frosted glass doors. Jean saw him and instantly moved to intercept him before Sophia could say a word. You tried to erase her, Jean said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was dense, carrying more weight than a shout. You didn't just undermine her. You tried to make her believe her own genius was a delusion. You stole her concepts, you stole her light, you stole her very name, and now you want to steal her legacy. Marcus stopped. He looked Jean over with a cool, detached curiosity. He adjusted the cufflink on his $1,000 shirt, a minute, dismissive gesture of a man who believed himself completely untouchable. Your protege was an immense talent, Jean, he said, his voice a condescending purr. But she was fragile. The demands of the final project, the pregnancy, it was too much. Everything I have done has been to protect the integrity of the firm's work. I'm sorry you lacked the perspective to grasp the larger picture. Jean's hands were balled into fists at his sides. Sophia laid a hand on his arm, a firm, grounding pressure that said, asterisk not here, not this way. I need you. Jean took a slow breath and stepped back. He looked at Marcus one last time. Isabella knew what you were, he said. She saw it, behind the magazine covers and the charity galas and the perfect billionaire facade. He has an empty space where a soul should be, and she filled it with a truth so strong he could never tear it down. Marcus offered no response. He turned, walked to his waiting black Bentley, and got in. The heavy door closed, sealing him in a tomb of silence. He sat for a full minute before the car silently pulled into traffic. That night, Sophia was alone in her own Brooklyn apartment. She felt her body give way into an old armchair, less a conscious decision and more a complete surrender of her exhausted frame. She picked up a framed photo of her sister from a bookshelf and held it on her lap. "I don't know how I'm going to finish this, Izzy," she whispered to the quiet room. "I'm a forensic accountant. I'm fighting a real estate mogul with a legal team that treats the law like a hostile takeover. I'm not sure I have it in me." The room was lined with financial journals, tax codes, and a single lamp casting a warm circle of light. Sophia looked down at the photograph. She saw her own tired face reflected in the glass, but beneath it, her sister's determined eyes, the same unyielding set of her jaw. Her sister, a master builder, looking right back at her. Sophia pressed her palms against the worn arms of the chair. She pushed herself upright. She stood, meeting her own gaze in the window that looked out onto the brownstones of her neighborhood. She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and walked back to her small, orderly desk. She didn't pick up the phone to call a friend. With a fresh legal pad, she started outlining her strategy, noting every weakness, every contradiction, every avenue for attack. The silence of the townhouse was no longer empty. It was the focused quiet of a historian arming for a battle. The Park Avenue penthouse felt like a cage, its air thick with unspoken resentments. Needing to escape, Arthur descended in the private elevator and had his driver take him to an old guard steakhouse in Midtown. He was seated in a plush leather booth. The room was hushed, smelling of aged wood, rich beef, and expensive whiskey. A waiter, moving with the silent efficiency of a career professional, offered a discreet nod. "The porterhouse for two," Arthur said, his voice empty, "and bring a bottle of the 1982 Bordeaux." He sat on the worn leather, observing the city's power brokers, a hedge fund manager loudly closing a deal on his phone, two partners from a white shoe law firm debating a merger, a family of real estate heirs celebrating a new acquisition. He couldn't taste the perfectly charred steak. Its savory depth was completely lost on him. It had been Chloe's favorite spot. They always came here to toast a new building commission she'd won. Arthur left a $1,000 tip on a $400 check. He walked the 20 blocks back to his building, letting the sharp New York wind cut right through his suit. He didn't touch the thermostat in his apartment. He welcomed the invasive chill, a physical confirmation that he was in a fight he was losing, and failure was not an option. It had been 6 months since Chloe's memorial service. The safe deposit key she'd arranged to be delivered after her death could either be his deliverance or his doom. Catherine Vance had spent that time building her case. She'd warned Arthur to brace for the worst. Arthur was not a patient man. He was many things, driven, calculating, grief-stricken, and furious, but he had never learned the art of waiting. The call arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Arthur was in a board meeting, looking out over the sprawling green of Central Park. His phone vibrated with a priority alert from his attorney, Marcus Thorne. "Arthur," Marcus began, his tone clipped and serious. "Are you in a secure location?" Arthur was already on his feet, moving toward the adjoining private study. A junior executive gave him a wide-eyed look as he sealed the soundproof door. "We know what was in Chloe's safe deposit box," Marcus said. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He could hear the low thrum of the skyscraper's HVAC system, the distant wail of a siren, the frantic rhythm of his own pulse. The entire universe seemed to constrict to the phone in his hand. "The twins," Marcus went on, and then he stopped, a rare moment of uncertainty from the city's most unflappable lawyer. "Leo and Lily, the box contained a confidential genetic workup along with a sealed, notarized letter. Neither of them shares your DNA, Arthur." The world didn't tilt. Instead, a massive edifice of anxiety he hadn't even been aware of building simply vanished into dust. The overcast Manhattan sky suddenly seemed luminous. "Say that again," he ordered, his voice a raw whisper. He needed to hear it once more to make the impossible words real, to cement this shocking turn of fortune. "I said neither child is biologically related to you. Not at all." The analysis was done by a leading genetics lab and is 100% conclusive. You are not the biological father of Chloe's children. Arthur pressed his palm against the cool floor-to-ceiling window of his office. He felt the solid, unmoving glass beneath his hand. He was still here, still in this tower, still in a life that had just been irrevocably, wonderfully overturned. How is that even possible? He breathed out. Marcus began to explain, laying out the precise, devastating plan Chloe had executed. For 2 years, Arthur and Chloe had worked with an exclusive fertility clinic. Arthur had been told his genetic profile was flawless, the perfect blueprint to carry on the sterling legacy. When 2 surrogacy attempts failed, the clinic's director suggested an advanced screening for a known hereditary cardiac condition in Arthur's family. Arthur had refused, insulted by the very suggestion of an imperfection in his lineage. Chloe's records showed that she went back to the clinic alone the next week. She signed authorization forms for an anonymous, rigorously vetted donor. Arthur Sterling's name was completely absent from the paperwork. She knew I'd never consent, Arthur said softly, the full scope of it dawning on him. Exactly, Marcus affirmed. Her letter to her mother is methodical. It says the clinic warned her there was a significant risk of passing on a fatal heart defect from your father's side. They advised strongly against using your sample. She chose the donor. She never told you. Arthur stood silent for a long moment. He pictured the state-of-the-art, custom-designed nursery, a monument to a perfect lineage. Why, Marcus? Why wouldn't she have told me? There was a passage in the letter she left her mother, Marcus said, his voice gentling. She wrote it the day she made the choice. He read from the document. The geneticist made the stakes clear, Chloe had written, her words calm and resolute. The risk was too great, so I chose another way. I didn't tell Arthur because he would have refused. He would have chosen his perfect legacy over the actual health of our children, and I wanted children more than I wanted his approval. It was the first decision in our marriage that I made entirely for them and for me. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, those words completely reshaping the narrative of his marriage, of his wife's silent fortitude. Chloe hadn't been unfaithful in the way he had imagined. She had made a secret, deeply logical medical decision because the man she was married to was too narcissistic to see beyond his own image, too fixated on his dynasty to put the health of his own children first. And this was the woman whose mother was now suing for full custody of 2 children who weren't his, trying to seize control of a trust fund built on Chloe's architectural genius, all while branding him a monster. So what is our next move? Arthur asked. Catherine's entire lawsuit has just been rendered obsolete. A grandmother with no biological connection has zero legal standing against the children's documented father, especially now, Marcus said, and this is where her own self-righteousness will be her downfall. When Isabella, Arthur's girlfriend, heard the news, her response was precisely what Arthur's legal team predicted. She was the one living the lie, Isabella declared to Arthur, to his parents, to anyone who would listen. Chloe was the cheater all along. Those babies aren't even his. For 3 days, Isabella reveled in her perceived moral triumph. This was her absolution. It was proof that Chloe was a fraud and Arthur was the victim. She told her confidants, her social media followers, and even drafted a gloating op-ed for an online art world journal. Then, Marcus Thorne's firm sent a single, carefully worded statement to the Wall Street Journal. It included an anonymized summary of the genetic risk assessment and a timeline confirming Chloe's choice was made to prevent a known hereditary disease, not to betray her husband. The court of public opinion didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed in a flash. Chloe hadn't cheated on Arthur. Chloe had saved her children from his flawed DNA. She had personally overseen the surrogate's care with meticulous attention. She had managed the entire complicated process with unwavering strength. She had designed their nursery to foster early cognitive growth and filled it with books and art. And she had done it all while knowing the man she was married to was sleeping with another woman. Catherine wasn't just defeated, She was publicly shamed. Her daughter's true legacy, her quiet sacrifice, the moral high ground she had claimed, all of it was exposed as a fiction she'd constructed. Her son-in-law, Arthur, called her that night. His voice was like ice. "You and I will be reaching an agreement concerning my children," he stated, "and you will never besmirch my name or Chloe's in public again." He ended the call. The sheer weight of his victory was immense and absolute. Arthur had spent years being unfaithful to the one person who was truly securing the future and well-being of their family. He had lied to her, diverted funds from their joint accounts, and carried on an affair, all while Chloe was quietly enduring the exhausting, lonely journey of medical appointments, hormone treatments, hope, and loss. She carried that burden alone, knowing that her husband's only material contribution to their future family was a single compromised genetic sample. Dr. Anya Sharma called Catherine later that week. Her voice was calm and professional, the tone of someone who had held a confidence for far too long. "Mrs. Vance," she said, "there's something I feel I must tell you. Your daughter met with me one last time before her final procedure. She told me something that I have never been able to forget." Catherine stopped breathing. She said, "If anything should happen to me, you must promise you will do whatever is necessary to ensure my mother becomes their legal guardian, not Arthur. You have to give me your word." I told her, of course, that she had no reason to worry, the doctor continued, her voice thick with regret. "I was wrong. But I remember her instructions exactly, and I am prepared to state them in a formal deposition if necessary." Eleanor sagged into a chair, clutching the phone. She could hear her daughter's voice in the lawyer's words, clear, determined, and protecting her children even now. Asterisk, not Damien, my mother. She thanked Marcus Thorne and ended the call. She sat in the darkening hotel suite, making no move to turn on a light. She didn't need one. She saw the path forward with perfect, searing clarity. Damien immediately began a media counterattack. He selected a journalist from a major tech publication, a writer known for his soft-focus profiles of Silicon Valley titans. Damien sat across from him in their stark, modern living room, now scrubbed clean of any trace of Clara's instruments or sheet music. He wore a simple, tailored dark suit, the very picture of a man in quiet grief, a man with nothing to conceal. "I adored my wife," he said, his voice catching with practiced precision. The camera moved in on his eyes, which held a carefully engineered sheen of moisture, telegraphing deep sorrow without the untidiness of actual tears. "I believed we were creating a family. I believed these children were our shared future, a piece of her, a piece of me. To find out that this entire foundation may have been a lie is the most profound betrayal a man can experience." The journalist delicately raised the subject of the affair. Damien navigated the question like a pro. "I was not a perfect husband," he conceded, "but my commitment to Clara was unconditional, and I never for one moment doubted that I was the father of her children. That essential truth was stolen from me without my consent." The feature story was syndicated across several tech blogs the following day. By afternoon, the comment sections had become battlegrounds, splitting the industry in two. One side defended the celebrated CEO, a genius grieving his wife. The other side was not nearly as forgiving. Damien Vance had made a fatal miscalculation. He was a virtuoso at seducing investors, orchestrating mergers, and charming billionaires at fundraisers. But the internet is not a closed-door meeting. The internet is the global court of public opinion, and it had some very specific questions. If he was so shattered by his wife's death, why was his new partner, a prominent venture capitalist, photographed overseeing the installation of a new security system at his penthouse less than a month after the memorial service? If he was so blindsided by the existence of a secret child, why had his lawyers already filed a motion to seize control of Clara's personal trust fund, valued at over $7 million? Why was he attempting to absorb her independent foundation for young musicians into his own corporate philanthropy wing? Marcus Thorne, Clara's lawyer, let the online inferno blaze for 3 full days. He let the questions multiply and public sentiment turn against Damien. Then, with the express permission of Clara's mother, Eleanor, he released a curated selection of documents to the most respected investigative reporters in the country. There was a power of attorney document with Clara's signature, displayed next to a forensic report proving it was a sophisticated AI forgery. There were financial records detailing a $5 million transfer from a joint marital account to an offshore entity controlled by Sophia Rossi, which was then used to fund a new biotech startup. And there was a time-stamped audio log recovered from the home's smart system that proved the affair began nearly a year before they had ever consulted a fertility doctor. Damien had been with Sophia the entire time, but it was one encrypted text message, now unsealed and part of the public court file for any reporter to see, that completely destroyed him. The message from Damien to Sophia was sent 9 months before Clara's death. As soon as the baby is born and she's a mess, we start the next phase. She'll be too tired to see it coming. She approves every wire transfer without a second thought. The woman has no idea what's really going on. His reputation as Seattle's golden boy didn't just tarnish, it evaporated. The news spread through the tech elite like a zero-day exploit, whispered between venture capitalists, angel investors, and coders, their texts lighting up with a collective, sharp-edged fury. Messages of solidarity flooded her inbox from women who recognized the pattern: the burner phones, the sudden trips to Zurich, the gaslighting about being overly emotional or paranoid. Evelyn wasn't some heartbroken wife. She was a CEO orchestrating a hostile takeover of her own life. She was the one building a fortress around her unborn child, the one drafting a lawsuit while she was drafting a birth plan, the one who fought the war in silence and was about to win it spectacularly. That's when Sasha called Miss Sterling. It was late on a Tuesday evening. Sterling was reviewing patent filings when her private number buzzed, displaying an unknown caller. She let it go to voicemail, but it rang again immediately. "Miss Sterling," a strained voice began. "My name is Sasha Petrova. I need to see you." A beat of silence. "And I can guarantee you'll want to see the evidence I have." She was huddled in the law firm's reception the next morning. She was ashen, her designer trench coat rumpled, her gaze distant and hollow. She had the look of someone who had just learned her reality was a meticulously crafted illusion. She had the look of someone who was finished being a pawn. She laid out the entire deception. Arthur was already laundering money through another channel, not through her gallery, and not even with her. A different asset, a shell company specializing in rare earth minerals based in Singapore. The proof was in the audio log she found, recorded the week after she'd hosted a private sale for him, while she was helping him choose a location for their getaway apartment while she was posting idyllic photos from their art fair trips, certain her future was secure. "I found the audio files on our shared server," Sasha said, her voice flat and brittle. "He must have discovered my own notes the same way Evelyn must have found his." A certain beautiful symmetry to it all, don't you think? Except I'm not the one expecting a child, and I'm not the one about to be indicted. Sasha slid her phone across the glass conference table toward Miss Sterling. The screen showed a thread of encrypted messages, conversations she had started screenshotting months ago. The lawyer swiped through them as Sasha detailed Arthur's plan to paint Evelyn as an unstable workaholic, unfit for motherhood. Arthur had coached Sasha, feeding her lines about Evelyn's supposed emotional breakdowns. He claimed that to secure a favorable custody arrangement, he needed a calm, cultured partner to stand with him, complaining that the family courts were inherently biased against self-made men. Then she delivered the final, devastating piece of the puzzle, the detail that made Miss Sterling put down her tablet and lean back slowly in her chair. "He told me I would be the kind of mother his daughter deserved," Sasha said, "not because he cared for me or even wanted another child, but because my reputation in the art world was a valuable social asset. It was the same way he viewed Evelyn, as a genius acquisition, a brilliant mind whose Nobel-nominated research made him look like the visionary he so desperately wanted to be. Miss Sterling observed her for a long time. "And what exactly are you hoping to achieve?" she asked. Sasha's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. She stared at her own reflection in the table, at the bespoke smartwatch Arthur had given her, the very same device whose geolocation data Evelyn's own tech expert had been trying to subpoena. "I am no innocent party here," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I'm not naive about my role. I knew he was married. I chose to believe he was trapped with a cold academic who couldn't appreciate him, the oldest lie in the book. But I knew nothing about the offshore accounts. I didn't know he was using my gallery's acquisitions to clean the money he was siphoning from their joint investment portfolio. I had no idea he was systematically liquidating her pre-IPO stock options to fund a new server farm in Iceland, all while she was pregnant with the baby he made me believe he wanted with me." She undid the clasp on the watch and placed it on the table. "I actually believed he was building a future for us. I was a fool about that, too." Miss Sterling picked up the watch, noted the serial number on the back, and set it down. "Are you prepared to testify to all of this?" she asked. "Absolutely," she replied, "in a sworn statement, on the stand, to a federal investigator, whatever is required." Evelyn received the update from Miss Sterling later that afternoon. She stood in her minimalist apartment overlooking the Puget Sound, processing the news without saying a word. "I have zero interest in absolving her," Evelyn said finally. "Let's be very clear about that. She had an affair with the man I'm married to. She was helping him design the life he was stealing from me. She posted pictures of my daughter's future artwork on her social media feed. That is a betrayal that cannot be undone." "I understand completely," Miss Sterling said. "But if her testimony guarantees he goes to prison," Evelyn continued, "then I will use it. My grandmother would have done the same thing. She was a survivor. She used every tool at her disposal." That weekend, Evelyn walked through the nearly finished nursery. It was the first time she'd been in the room since she discovered the files. The advanced fetal heart monitor she'd been installing had automatically synced to their home network, revealing a folder labeled Contingencies, a digital ghost in the machine. Evelyn could never bring herself to delete it. That small bit of data bearing Arthur's name, the digital proof of a man who had fully expected his wife to be the one taking the fall. For 2 hours, she found solace among the giant ferns and rare orchids of the botanical gardens. She passed the tranquil Japanese garden and the very bench where she and a young Clara used to sit, where Clara would map out complex algorithms on a notepad, calling them blueprints for thinking machines. She would push away thoughts of the courtroom. She would push away thoughts of Julian. She refused to dwell on manipulated clinical trial data, on venture capital fraud, or on encrypted servers. The baby books claimed she was too little for a real giggle, but Eleanor heard it anyway, a small, effervescent sound like a bubble of pure joy escaping. She walked for 2 hours and never once checked her phone. The final hearing convened on a Tuesday in courtroom 700. The same low hum of the air conditioning, the same faint smell of disinfectant, the same polished concrete floors. But the atmosphere was different now. The silence was heavy, thick with a tension that felt like the Bay Area fog just before it consumes the bridges. Eleanor wore the simple navy dress again, the one Clara had gushed over at a gallery opening. Around her neck, she wore a small, unassuming hard drive on a silver chain. It held Clara's final, devastatingly brilliant project. Julian showed up alone. He had dismissed his high-powered legal team. His new attorney was young, clearly out of his depth, and looked completely unnerved by the proceedings. Julian's father, a legend in the semiconductor industry, was nowhere to be seen. He had reportedly cut off all contact after the scandal erupted on a major tech news outlet, after the damning data was leaked, after the family name became synonymous with words like corruption, fraud, and betrayal. Miss Albright began the presentation. It was digital, chronological, and utterly ruinous. The AI ethics researcher's masterwork, a private, time-locked blockchain ledger, came to life on the courtroom monitors. The investment fraud, the digitally forged signatures on IP transfers, the web of shell companies used to purchase a secret Marine County mansion, the systematic draining of a family trust. Each piece of evidence was an immutable, time-stamped block in an unbreakable chain. Perhaps Miss Albright had learned such precision from Clara, or Clara from her. In either case, the argument was constructed like one of Clara's own neural networks, layered, interconnected, flawlessly logical, and impossible to corrupt. The DNA report, the digital contracts from the fertility clinic, the donor agreement signed only by Clara, the deposition from her physician, and the encrypted video log where she explained her decision to become a mother on her own terms. Then came Sophia's testimony. She took the stand, her voice clear and unwavering. She did not cry. She detailed the affair, the timeline, the saved audio messages about their supposed future, the recordings of Julian strategizing how to manage Eleanor, and the shocking moment she discovered another woman was also in his life. "He never loved me," Sophia stated plainly. "He never loved Clara. He doesn't love that child. He loves the character of Julian Croft, the visionary venture capitalist with the genius wife and the perfect life. We were all just assets in his portfolio, and when an asset becomes a liability, he divests." Julian's new lawyer attempted a cross-examination. It was brief and hopeless. The digital evidence was too absolute, the timeline too precise, the encrypted trail too clear. Dr. Sharma testified next, recalling Clara's directive. "If anything ever happens to me, you make sure my mother gets my baby." She said it just like that. The words needed no interpretation. Clara's mentor from her postdoc program spoke of her former students' change in behavior. The secretive phone calls, the way her easy laugh had vanished, the celebrated AI ethicist who suddenly started avoiding major tech summits, the friend he now wished he had reached out to more. The Guardian ad litem delivered her report. She had invested 4 weeks speaking with everyone involved, assessing both homes and observing the infant with Eleanor and with Julian. Her recommendation was absolute. The child's well-being is best served by granting sole legal custody to her maternal grandmother, Eleanor Vance, Mrs. Vance provides consistent, loving, and stable care. Mr. Croft has demonstrated a history of profound deceit, ethical malfeasance, and a personal philosophy that clearly does not prioritize his child. The judge deliberated for 2 hours. For 2 hours, Eleanor sat on a hard bench in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the far wall, her hand clutching the hard drive pendant at her neck as she focused on each breath. Clara's old roommate from Stanford paced the corridor, his footsteps a restless beat against the floor. Her former department head sat beside her, holding her hand. He offered no words, he knew none were needed. A long friendship with Clara had taught him that the women of this family didn't require platitudes, they required solidarity. The bailiff called them back in. The courtroom stood, the judge entered, took her seat, and adjusted her papers. She slid on her glasses. "In the matter of the guardianship of Olivia Vancecroft," the judge began, "this court finds as follows." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt the frantic pulse in her throat, at her temples, a wild rhythm against the room's dead silence. "Full and sole legal and physical custody is hereby awarded to Eleanor Grace Vance." Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut. She made no sound. She shed no tear. She just closed her eyes and let the words sink into her soul. The court also mandates that Julian Croft repay all funds misappropriated from the marital assets and the estate of the deceased. The fraudulent transfer of intellectual property is hereby referred to the United States Attorney's Office for a full criminal investigation. Julian sat as if he were carved from ice. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear. Julian gave one small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, the gesture of a king who had just been checkmated. Mr. Croft's license to act as a fund manager will be suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of the federal inquiry. Any and all claims to parental authority are hereby terminated. The judge then raised her head, looking past the documents before her. Her eyes found Eleanor's. Mrs. Vance, your daughter constructed a remarkable fortress, not just of data, but of love. This court recognizes the profound and intelligent measures Dr. Vance took to shield her child. It is this court's honor to uphold her final wishes. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. She met the judge's gaze and gave one firm, definitive nod. My gratitude to the court, Your Honor, she stated, her voice steady for the first time in what felt like an eternity. In the quiet corridor outside, her lawyer, Mr. Harrison, handed Evelyn a second item. It wasn't a legal document, but a small, encrypted thumb drive on a simple leather cord. Affixed to it was a note in her daughter Chloe's neat, concise script. For Mom, when it's over. She gave this to me 2 months before the twins were born, Mr. Harrison said gently. Her instructions were very specific. I was only to give it to you once the guardianship was finalized. She said you'd know why when you saw it. Evelyn's fingers closed around the drive. It was weightless, a piece of plastic and metal, but it felt heavier than anything she had ever held. She didn't plug it in at the law firm. She didn't even look at it in the car ride back to Belltown. She went directly to Chloe's startup, the office now cold and silent, and sat in the CEO's chair overlooking the waters of Lake Union. The lights of Seattle's tech hub began to smear into a glittering digital web. It was late fall, and a persistent drizzle traced paths down the floor-to-ceiling windows, a constant gray rhythm Chloe had always claimed helped her code. She slid the small drive into her daughter's laptop. A single prompt appeared on the screen. The name of the stray cat we saved during the storm? Evelyn typed the answer. Only they would know. A video file opened. Dear Mom, Chloe's image said, her face pale but her eyes full of fire. If you're watching this, it means you won. It means Noah and Lily are safe with you. I am so sorry I didn't tell you everything about Marcus, about his partner Sienna, about their plan to steal my source code. I was so humiliated, not for needing help, but for loving a man who saw my life's work as just another asset to be stripped and sold. These babies are mine, every line of their code, every beat of their tiny hearts. I chose them. I designed their future. I sing to them every night. I told them about you, Mom. I told them you taught yourself to code at 45 just to support me, that you never gave up, and that you will love them just as you loved me, fiercely and without reservation. I'm not scared of dying. I am terrified of them being raised in Marcus's world of valuations and exit strategies. That's why I created this digital vault. That's why I hired the best IP lawyer in the state. That's why my entire will was rewritten. You're going to be exhausted, Mom. 2 infants at 65. But I know you. You have the strongest operating system of anyone I know. You cheered me on when I dropped out of grad school to build this company, when everyone else said I was insane. You are the most brilliant mind I have ever known. Tell them about me, not the broken parts. Tell them I loved rainy Seattle days and terrible sci-fi movies, and that my first algorithm was a complete disaster. Tell them I miss them with every bit of my being. I miss them already. I love you, Mom. Now go be their grandmother and their mother and their entire universe. You're Chloe. Evelyn sat with the laptop, the screen gone dark. Her daughter had recorded the message like a product pitch, direct, logical, and powerfully persuasive. The founder in her demanding a perfect presentation, even in her last testament. She copied the video file into her own secure cloud, a digital inheritance. She put the drive in her pocket, a modern-day locket. She stood up. She splashed water on her face from the filtered tap in the office kitchenette. She dried it on her sleeve. In the reflection of a dark monitor, she saw her own face, graying hair, Chloe's hair. She walked to the small balcony overlooking the water. The wind coming off the lake was sharp and cold. A seaplane, a shimmering silhouette against a sky the color of slate, descended toward the water. "You outcoded him, baby girl," Evelyn whispered. "From inside the machine, you saved your own children." She gripped the cool metal railing. She held on for a moment, then turned and headed for the elevator. Marcus was waiting in the lobby. Sienna was not. The twins were in the car with their new caregiver, a woman named Maria, 62 years old, a retired neonatal nurse a friend had recommended. Calm demeanor, capable hands. Noah had fallen asleep against her chest almost immediately. Evelyn slid into the back seat. She fastened her seatbelt. She looked at the two car seats, two perfect sleeping faces. Lily began to stir, her eyelids fluttering, bright blue eyes staring right at him. A real smile finally broke across Robert's face, the first in what seemed like a lifetime. It wasn't the strained expression he wore for visitors. It was genuine. He motioned to the driver. The car pulled into the evening traffic of South Lake Union. The lights from the Amazon spheres cast a futuristic glow on the wet streets. 6 months later, Chloe's minimalist condo felt completely different. Not because of any major changes, but in the quiet way a home adapts to new life, a slow, organic transformation. The structure was the same, but a new rhythm echoed through it. Robert had turned Chloe's home office into a nursery, painting the walls a soft sage green, the color of the Pacific Northwest forests she had loved. He kept her whiteboard, still covered in the complex architecture of her last project, and her shelves of technical manuals, but the room was now soft and welcoming, the color of a new beginning. He had taken down Chloe's framed awards from tech conferences and innovation summits. In their place, he began a new gallery. Photos of the twins at 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, a new legacy taking root, the sound of Lily's first laugh, the sight of Noah's determined crawl toward a dropped pacifier. Chloe's coding journals, which had been locked in a safe, were now open on the coffee table. Robert, a retired software engineer himself, spent his nights studying them. He had been out of the industry for years. Chloe was the prodigy, the artist who could write code that felt like poetry. But he was determined to understand her final work. He read her notebooks, filled with her precise, logical script, detailing the framework for a new AI-driven wellness platform. A revolutionary concept for a self-learning mental health application remained on the whiteboard. Robert regarded it as a sacred text. The legal battle, armed with Chloe's digital evidence, was swift. Marcus Vance's legal team arranged a plea deal for 5 years in a federal facility, plus financial restitution that dismantled his venture capital empire and a permanent ban from the technology sector. His firm was dissolved, its portfolio absorbed by competitors. The board of the Seattle Symphony requested his father's immediate resignation. His name, once a celebrated feature in tech journals and at industry panels, was now a footnote in court documents detailing his staggering fall from grace. Catherine Vance, Marcus's mother, refused to accept his calls from prison. It wasn't a moral stand, but a calculated defense of her own social standing. Her son had turned the Vance name into a liability in Seattle's elite circles. Sienna simply vanished. The glass-walled apartment Marcus had been renting for her in Bellevue was emptied overnight. The last anyone heard, she was working as a waitress in Arizona, trying to start over. She sent Robert a single typed letter 3 months after the plea deal. It said, "I am so sorry for my part in all of this. I know it's meaningless now." Robert read the note. He never replied, but he didn't discard it. He put it in a box of Chloe's old things, a flimsy paper record of a monumental betrayal, a reminder that the woman who had helped destroy his daughter's life was also the one whose conscience had led her to cooperate with the investigation, securing his grandchildren's inheritance. Dr. Lena Petrova, a practical pediatrician from Capitol Hill, became a constant in their new life. She visited every Tuesday, always bringing a thermos of strong coffee from a local roaster and a board book for each twin. She would check their milestones and chart their growth, asking Robert about their routines and quirks, but she always lingered afterward. She would sit at the kitchen counter and talk with Robert about things far removed from pediatrics, about the Mariners' tragic season, about a new exhibit at the art museum, about her own daughter, who was a software engineer at a rival tech firm. They formed an unlikely alliance, a quiet support system. A 68-year-old retired programmer and a 59-year-old doctor bound by the memory of the woman they had both cared for and by a shared, unspoken vow to protect her legacy. Evelyn showed up every Sunday, a ritual that became sacred. She would arrive at 10 a.m. with pastries from Pike Place Market, where she and Chloe used to wander on weekend mornings. She always brought two. A savory croissant for Robert, and a sweet almond one, because Chloe had sworn it was the perfect fuel for creative thinking. After their breakfast, Evelyn would read to the twins. She was creating a digital map of hidden wonders, a gargoyle with a secret smile, a terracotta tile that told a forgotten story. Her unborn son, Oliver, would kick with excitement every time she recorded a new entry, a sudden, firm nudge that seemed to thrill her to her core, a small, perfect moment of connection. "Your father thinks this is just a hobby," Amelia whispered to her belly one afternoon, propping her feet on an ottoman as she reviewed audio files on her laptop. "But he doesn't see the world the way we do. He sees plots of land, but we see the ghosts in the brickwork. I'll make sure you always see them." Meanwhile, Richard, for his part, was building a new legacy in a different part of the city. For months, the Phoenix Tower project was his obsession. He'd come home from his development firm and work late into the night, reviewing blueprints until dawn broke over Lake Michigan. He used groundbreaking ecopolymers and smart glass technologies inspired by a design philosophy a new, influential artist had introduced him to. The entire lobby was designed around a massive, abstract sculpture of brushed bronze, the very first piece he'd acquired from her gallery, a color Sophia had called molten ambition. The project wasn't for his son, not really. At 7 months pregnant, Amelia was still picking out nursery furniture. It was for the man he was trying to become, for the headlines, the accolades, the next big deal. For the days he could stand on the top floor and see his own name etched into the Chicago skyline, a place where he could feel his power, feel his vision, and get closer to the brilliant, daring woman he couldn't get out of his mind. On the architectural model in his office, he'd placed a tiny, custom-printed flag with 2 words: "The Davenport Apex." She discovered it on a rainy Tuesday evening. Amelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in their living room, watching the city lights blur through the rain. The charge on the credit card statement was a stunning 5-figure anomaly, a sharp contrast to the usual household expenses. He would have mentioned a purchase this large, Amelia thought, her heart starting to beat a little faster. "He would have said it was a surprise for the baby," Richard replied with a practiced smile when she asked. And Amelia managed a nod. A weak, unconvincing gesture that seemed to come from a place she thought was secure forever. It was a lie she never imagined she would hear, yet there it was, unexpected and cold, evidence that a crack could form in the most solid foundation. In the quiet of the next day, after Richard had left for a site visit and a hush fell over the penthouse, Amelia Googled the name on the receipt. Rossi Gallery. She sat in her office, perfectly positioned in her ergonomic chair, just close enough to the microphone to capture the intimate, hushed tone of her voice. The chair was a modern classic she'd bought years ago. She had spent a weekend assembling it herself, a labor of focus. Richard had teased her about the charcoal wool fabric, but she loved its simple, quiet strength, faintly smelling of the old books that lined her shelves. Amelia would record, her voice a steady, even cadence, the sound of something constant and true in the stillness. She would look at the nursery across the hall, at the custom-printed mural of a vintage city map that covered one wall, and at the nightlight that projected a soft, shifting pattern resembling the Chicago grid onto the ceiling, bathing the room in a gentle amber light. She had designed the mural herself, and a friend at the university had helped her print it. The boxes had arrived a week ago, She had put it up herself, her hands steady. Oliver always seemed to rest on her right side, a habit she found endearing. The moment she sat down, he would settle into a comfortable position and stay there, perfectly still. That peaceful self-possession, Amelia felt it in him right away. It was pure calm through and through. He slept soundly inside her, his tiny body a warm weight against her as if dreaming of future explorations. At only 7 months along, Amelia wondered what his brand new mind was sensing. Vibrations, probably. The comfort of his mother's heartbeat, the muffled sounds of the city, the loving murmur of a voice in his ear. He was the calmer of the two of them, the more contemplative. He waited for her to eat. He waited for her to settle in for the night. He waited for the distant sound of the L train to fade, and only then would he give his own small nudge. It was never a jolt, not a complaint, but a single, clear message. I am here. I am listening. Amelia was in her office, her eyes on the steady blinking cursor of the search bar. One perfect little human, brought into the world by love and a mother's unyielding devotion. He was the product of a woman's powerful belief that the family she had always imagined was finally within reach. She knew how the gossip blogs would frame the story. A real estate tycoon, a pregnant wife, and a secret affair that became the talk of Chicago's elite social scene. A perfect marriage cut down far too soon. But that narrative completely missed the heart of the matter. The real story was about a mother who loved her child with such astonishing foresight that she constructed an entire world for him before the first crack had even appeared in her own. A woman who uncovered hidden receipts, cross-referenced private calendars, researched divorce lawyers, and drafted a plan to protect her son. She methodically planned for the absolute worst-case scenario while, at the same time, she was choosing lullabies for his playlist and humming to the one small heartbeat she carried inside her. The true story was about a mother who fought her first war in complete silence and secured her victory before the battle had even been declared. Amelia rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights twinkling over the lake. The stark, modern sculpture in Millennium Park was a dark silhouette against the illuminated skyline. The tiny herb garden on their balcony was dormant for the winter. She picked up the small silver locket from her jewelry box. She had found it while looking for the gallery's address, the very one Richard had given her on their first anniversary, its chain perfectly coiled, its face glowing faintly in the dim light. A reminder of a false north. Amelia opened the clasp. On the smooth marble surface of Richard's desk, she used her finger to trace the outline of a single damning receipt. She did the same thing with a printout of a dinner reservation for two tiny invisible marks. A wife's touch could never have the same certainty as a lover's, but the intent was now the same, a constant resolve whispered into the cold, silent air. She closed the locket and placed it back in its box. She would leave it there until the day her son was old enough to grasp its significance, for the day he was ready to chart his own course. A glance at the clock, 11:45. A new day was moments away. She knew she needed to rest, to save her energy. She had a 7-month-old baby inside her who needed calm and comfort and every bit of love she possessed. And she would provide it. All of it. Every morning, every evening, every healthy meal, every doctor's visit, every gentle word, every song, every scraped knee, every first word, every nightmare. She would give him everything because it was the legacy she was building for him and because it was simply who Amelia was, who she'd always been, who she would remain until her final day. She began to speak softly, a simple historical fact about the Wrigley Building, the same one her own father had told her while they stood on a bridge decades ago. A story that wove 3 generations of Chicagoans together. No complicated words, just the melody of pure devotion traveling through the years. The baby shifted, as if listening. The faint light from a single moon-shaped lamp cast a gentle silver glow on the ceiling. The penthouse was still. Outside, the first true stars began to glitter above the dark expanse of the lake with its steady rhythm and its quiet promise of future sails and shared sunrises and a happiness that was only just an idea, but one destined to grow. In its own time, her world now focused on one tiny mouth to nourish, one path to guide, one heart now beating in the world because hers was breaking. And Amelia, at 35 years old, with her tired eyes and her determined smile, felt more vibrantly, deeply, and stubbornly alive than ever before. She wouldn't trade a single moment of it, not for all the skyscrapers in this world or any other. This narrative carries a single, powerful truth that nothing can diminish. Love does not cease when a trust is broken. The love of a mother weaves a legacy that will always endure. It leaves behind a blueprint to guide her child long after a partnership has departed. It shields the family she must now hold together on her own. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a genuine emotion, we invite you to do one small thing. Hit the thumbs up button. Drop a comment below and let us know which part of the journey touched you the most. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own enduring strength. And for our new viewers, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Your support is the very reason we can continue our work. Each like, every comment, and every share provides the motivation for us to keep creating, to keep sharing narratives that matter, tales that linger in your thoughts long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for journeying with us to the very end. You are why we do this. This content was carefully researched, written, and manually edited by our dedicated team to provide you with inspiring stories and valuable insights. All characters and situations are fictional, crafted for the purpose of entertainment and reflection.